Good morning. Can I welcome members to the 24th meeting of the Education and Culture Committee in 2012, and can I remind members and those in the public gallery to ensure that all electronic devices should be switched off at all times. Can I welcome new member to the committee, George Adam, and also Mary Scanlon, who's here as a substitute for Liz Smith. Apologies have been received from Liz Smith and from another one of our new members, Colin Beattie. But obviously, can I also welcome back to the committee Marco Biaggi as Colin's substitute, and again Mary Scanlon as Liz's substitute. The first item on the agenda is to invite George Adam to declare any registrable interests which are relevant to the committee's remit. George Adam.
Just say to have a look at my published declaration of interests. Also, just for completeness, I was a councillor in Renfrewshire Council until May this year. That was it.
Okay, thank you. And Mary Scanlon, do you wish to make any declare any registrable interests?
Again, I would refer members to my published register of interests.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 2 on the agenda, it's a decision on taking business in private. The second item is to consider whether to take item 7 in private, which will involve considering the approach to our new inquiry into taking children into care. This will include a discussion of the groups from whom we want to take oral evidence and other matters. Are members content to take agenda item 7 in private? Thank you very much. Before I move on to agenda item 3, can I just provide members with some information? We did invite the BBC to attend the committee and provide evidence on the cuts to both jobs and finance for BBC Scotland. Both the head of BBC Scotland and the new head of BBC in the UK have declined our invitation to attend and provide oral evidence to the committee. They have said that they have nothing to add to previous evidence they have given. I have to say to the committee that I'm extremely disappointed by the response of the BBC on this matter, given that the announcement in terms of the facts of the job losses was after the last time they appeared at the committee. I would have expected them to accept our invitation. However, they have made it clear that they do not wish to attend. Moving on to agenda item 3. Our third item is an evidence session on the Scottish Government's draft budget for 2013-2014. The committee has agreed that the following broad objectives will shape our scrutiny of this year's draft budget: to determine how last year's final allocations helped the Scottish Government to deliver its policy objectives, to identify the progress that remains to be made and how the allocations in this year's draft budget will help to achieve this, and thirdly, to assess how spending on FE and HE is contributing to the Scottish Government's overarching purpose. Now, the committee will have 2 evidence sessions from today, then another next week, before taking evidence from both the Cabinet Secretary for Education and the Cabinet Secretary for External Affairs and Culture on Tuesday the 23rd of October. Our first panel today will provide an expert overview of the main issues currently facing the further and higher education sectors. And can I welcome to the committee Paul Buchanan, former Chair of Board of Management at Reid Kerr College. Good morning. Professor Jim Gallagher, Emeritus Professor of Lifelong Learning, Glasgow Caledonian University. Good morning. And Professor Jeremy Peat, Director of the David Hume Institute. Good morning, gentlemen. Can I now move straight to questions from members and begin by asking a question to start from Neil Findlay.
Before we begin, I wonder if it should be noted on the record that while I'm here in my role as an independent academic, I also am a board member of the City of Glasgow College. So I'm clearly not here in that capacity, but I felt perhaps it was appropriate that for the record that should be noted.
No, thank you very much for that, Professor Gallagher. And can I again ask Neil Findlay to kick us off?
I wonder if I could ask to begin with for you to give your view on the general direction of government policy in relation to colleges.
Who wishes to begin?
Silence. Stunned.
Mr. Buchanan.
For want of another volunteer, I'll just say a few things. Government policy seems to be directing us towards an emphasis on younger rather than more mature students overall. Lots of reasons why that is the response. But one of the things this is causing is a shift towards full-time rather than part-time part-time education. And I think that one of the concerns that rises because of that is that there may be, or certainly a couple of years ago, when this started to manifest itself, the full-time places started to be taken up by people facing redundancy and people leaving jobs and seeking to retrain. And the full-time, as I think you'll see later in evidence, and certainly in some of the submitted evidence, the full-time courses were traditionally taken up by school leavers and younger people. So immediately there was a bit of an issue in terms of competition for places. And I say that means that there's a backlog of people leaving school and not finding places to go. The second thing that I think we're seeing as a result of this policy is an increase in what I would term biscuit tin funding, and that's a term that was used many years ago by the chair of the Funding Council in an effort to abolish it. And what we're seeing is that coming back. An increasing number of small pots aimed at funding initiatives to get people into employment, get people into training and all the rest of it. And what you see in some places, and I know in Renfrewshire, for example, as many as 7 different competing biscuit tin pots of money, all trying to get people back into employment and get young people involved in the labour market and get young people involved in education. And it's causing a bit of duplication, it's causing a bit of confusion in the marketplace, and it's potentially causing increased administration and needs for coordination. I think there are other implications in terms of the college estate. I think that over the last 10 or so years, the college estate has improved out of all recognition, and I think a lot of credit goes to those who funded that. And when I first started on the board of management, I remember dodging the buckets that have been placed to catch the drips coming through the ceiling. I think most learners across Scotland would find that they're in a very suitable environment. And I think there's a bit of a challenge in maintaining and continuing to improve the learning environment on the back of it. But the key thing I would say is that the implications of the tightness on the funding may impact on quality. And if you're looking at larger class sizes, potentially fewer places available for students, and more administration carried out by teaching staff, then potentially the impact on that is going to be, you're going to get more numbers going through the system, but potentially lower quality.
Thank you, sir. At the David Hume Institute, we've been working recently on some research on the further education sector for Scotland's colleges, and the report will be published within about the next month, so I will make sure that you and other members of the committee receive copies. This, if you like, is a follow-up to work we did last year on higher education, where copies of our report were circulated, and we continue to look at HE with the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So that's just by way of background. So far as my views as an economist are, clearly this is a time of very severe budget constraints, and I don't envy Mr. Swinney and yourselves the job of trying to put together a budget within those constraints that also tackles the major economic issues, because we are in and are likely to remain for a little while in recession, with issues regarding our labour market absolutely critical. And my view is that for making the best fist for Scotland in the recovery phase, as and when that comes, we need to make sure that we maintain our skills base and enhance our skills base, as well as maintaining our infrastructure. So I'm agreeing very much with the priorities that have been set up. Within that context, I do believe that further education has a major role to play, and indeed that further education can reach parts of the labour market and young folk in a way that other sectors cannot. So I think in terms of the diversity of what FE can do and the group of people that it can reach out to, I think it is a hugely important sector. And I am aware that there has been a reduction for a number of years now in college rolls and in budgets. And I think this is putting severe strains on the FE sector at a time when there is a need to work at both ends of the labour market, if you like, to work both on those who are entering the labour market with very limited skills and those who need readjustment training through their careers in order to have the skills that are required to participate in this difficult and complex economy. So I think that I see the case for a significant priority for FE. I'm glad that there has been some offset to the cuts announced. I find it quite difficult to work through at this stage exactly what that means, and I don't want to enter into a numbers debate with anyone because I don't think at this stage it would be productive, but I hope the committee will, with its supporters, will find out exactly what it does mean. But I do believe that FE is a priority in the context of the economy, and I think that a great deal of priorities should be addressed there, even within the context of a very constrained budget. One other thing I'd add, though, is that I think it's not just a matter of providing the skills to individuals and trying to work on the motivation of young people. There is also an issue of the way in which jobs in the labour market are limited in their requirement for skills. I think it's rather remarkable that amongst European countries, only in Spain, Portugal and Turkey is there a greater proportion of jobs requiring no education beyond compulsory school than is the case in Scotland. And I think there's also the case that once people get into very low-level jobs, they are not given the incentives to develop their skills and capability in work and to progress. And I think the apprentice approach is one way through that. But I think also there's a need to work with employers, and I think FE colleges are very well placed to work with the colleges in their labour market to say, let's make the most of people. Let's see how skill enhancement can work with people in very low-level jobs, as well as getting people into jobs. So I think there's a major role for the college sector. I think it needs to be a flexible and adjusting and adapting role. And I think that Parliament should be looking to provide funding in the areas that are right for this adjusting role in the years ahead. Thank you.
Alka, anything to add?
Yes, thank you. Members of the committee will be aware of the written evidence that I have submitted in advance, and I've included some data there that I hope might be helpful to members of the committee. If I could pick up, I think, firstly on this issue of the increasing emphasis there is on 16 to 19-year-olds in current policy. I mean, this is clearly a policy that we would see as a very... It is very important that that there is adequate provision for young people at a time, of economic recession of this kind. I think what the data that I've quoted here indicates is that people in the 16 to 18 age group, which is the Funding Council's band, are already about 20% of all college participants, and that they're indeed 44% of all full-time participants. So I think an interesting question here, and I've tried to indicate some of these, is what is it that the college sector will be able to provide for these additional young people? I think we have to be confident that if we are bringing more young people into the college sector, that we're able to give them courses that are of an appropriate quality and are likely to lead to relevant qualifications. So I think that's an interesting and important question. If you look at the recent data about the numbers of young people who are not in employment, education or training, we've got 31,000. So I mean, there's a lot of young people there. They are young people who are very difficult to engage in various ways. And so I think a very important question is, at a time when college budgets are being cut, as all the evidence suggests, what will the college sector be able to offer for these young people in a way that really makes a big difference? And as Professor Peat has indicated, I mean, it's rather difficult at this stage to know what the implications of the additional bits of money are, and Mr. Buchanan has also indicated, that this kind of idea of biscuit tin funding, I mean, we are getting different bits of money coming from different sources, and some of it's quite short term. So I think there's a big question here about developing a really long-term strategy. Alongside that, I think it also has to be borne in mind, and I think Mr. Buchanan made some reference to this, is that the colleges have been very successful in providing opportunities for adult returners. That has been a major success story for the colleges over many years. A lot of the research that I've done over the years has shown really how very successful the colleges are. And again, at a time of economic change, it's very important that we are creating opportunities for older people to be reskilled as well. So I think it's crucially important that these different priorities are balanced. And I think the reductions in college budgets do make it difficult to do that. Another linked thing, if I can just comment very briefly, is, as you know, there is a considerable emphasis on regionalisation and mergers between colleges. Now, in many respects, I think this is very valuable. It's something that has been long overdue, a significant realignment. But I think we've got to also recognise that a very valuable function the colleges have had has been their local presence, and especially for, again, adult returners. So it's important that when we're moving towards this restructured college sector, we don't lose this important local presence as part of that.
Thank you very much. Before I bring Mr. Finlay back in, I was very lenient and I let everybody speak as long as you wanted on that, but we're very tight for time this morning, so I would ask that you keep your answers fairly short and brief, to the point. Same with questions for members, and also not everybody has to answer every question, if you don't mind, gentlemen. Neil Finlay.
Yeah, very brief on this. Can each of the members give us a figure of what the cut is this year? One figure is all I need. And secondly, can you tell us what impact that cut will have on places, courses and jobs?
Let me just kick off by saying I can't at this stage give you a figure for what that cut is in absolute terms. I've tried to look at the data, I've looked at them 2 or 3 times, and I don't wish to give you one figure. But I am of the view that there is a cut, and that this will have an impact on quality of provision and or numbers. It depends on how it is implemented going through. It's difficult to be more precise at this time.
I think I would tend to agree with Professor Peat there. There are so many complex issues here. I think what I would say, however, is that there is no doubt that the college sector over the last number of years has experienced a very significant cut in its budgets, and that this, undoubtedly has had major implications in terms of trying to maintain both the range and the quality of provision.
And likewise, I'm afraid I'm not able to give a figure. But I would say that this is definitely a trend, and the downward trend would appear to continue into next year as well.
I find it remarkable that 3 eminent people who are very expert in this field cannot tell us what the cut is. I think that is speaks volumes for how opaque this system is. But in light of what you've said about there is a significant cut, do you understand how we can then have members of the government telling us that there's no cut?
Well, I think you to an extent answered that question yourself by the fact that the figures are complicated. I mean, the college teaching funding has reduced, my understanding, for 13-14 there will be a reduction of about 1.5% in college teaching funding. But there is an increase in some other elements, and there is some additional funding which is coming in which may or may not be permanent and may or may not impact. This is why it is complicated, because of the different elements and trying to put them all together into a figure which the colleges will have then to work on for their course provision. That is what I'm not able to.
You think it's misleading for us to be told that there's no cut?
I would be very pleased to have figures that are so transparent that there's no question of what the veracity of the position is.
I'll take that as a yes.
Okay, we'll just take that as a...
Could any other members add anything?
Well, if they have anything different to say. No. Okay, thank you. Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. Given that I'm standing in for Liz Smith today, I tried to do a little bit of homework so that I wasn't letting the side down. And by the end of last night and this morning, I just couldn't come to grips with the figures. But I find it convener very reassuring that Jeremy Pete can't work it out, so I don't feel so bad now. Could I just focus in on one figure that was given to me by my colleague Liz Smith, and it is the same figure as the EIS have given in their evidence, and that is the teaching grant. Now, both of them say the teaching grant has gone down in 2 years from 2010-11 to 12-13 from 521.3 million to 387. Now, that is not 1.5% cut, that's a 25% cut. Now, I do appreciate what you're saying about biscuit tin funding, but having lectured in FE and ITCHE for 20 years before coming here, they were seriously tightening their belts throughout the 80s and the 90s, and I just wondered, how can they cope with teaching, which is what it's all about, whether it's a 16-year-old or an adult learner getting another chance? How can this sector cope with a 25% cut in the teaching budget?
Could I just start by saying that when the cuts first started to hit home a couple of years ago, the response of colleges was tremendous. And there was a lot of smart work done through colleges, trimming costs, consolidating classes, increasing class sizes, and so on and so forth. More efficient management of classes, and all those kinds of things. And as far as I'm aware, much of the work in terms of efficiencies, in terms of delivery to stretch the available resource has been done, and I would find it very difficult to see how further efficiencies in teaching can be made without significant losses to student numbers. I'll give you an example. I mean, one of the things that we did immediately before I left Reed Care College, we opened a new engineering facility, and one of the things that we did behind that was to improve the efficiency of teaching. We increased class sizes from, say, 12 to 18 through the new facility. Better health and safety and so on. So you can immediately see there's a massive increase in productivity. However, if you cut the teaching budget and you lose a member of staff, you don't suddenly go down to 12, you go down to 0. So we're at the stage where losses in teaching numbers will actually have potentially a larger impact, a disproportionate impact on student numbers, and that remains to be seen. I mean, there's no direct evidence of that happening yet, but my opinion would be that that would be the next stage.
Add to that?
Just very briefly, Chair. I mean, again, in my written evidence, I have tried to indicate some of the key questions I think have to be asked. I've raised these particularly with regard to the idea of increasing provision for 16 to 19-year-olds. So it does seem to me that there are a number of key questions that has to be asked about the quality of provision. In a sense, what as an academic here, I'm indicating I think these are questions that we have to ask and seek evidence on them.
Question, Convener, and that really is about the quality. I know many adult learners, for example, they didn't want to commit to a university degree of 4 years, so they would do an HNC and then they could go into second year, they'd do an HND and go into third year. And my concern now is with the huge cuts 25% in 2 years in the teaching budget in further education, will these adult learners be able to articulate from a college to a university and slip in as they've done in the past? Because from what I've read, I'm not sure. I just feel that gate could be closed now. I have concerns about that.
Well, I mean, I think there are interesting questions here. I think it has to be recognised that both the Scottish Government and the Funding Council have placed considerable emphasis on articulation as a key policy. A lot of the restructuring that's gone on within the Funding Council recently has been to try to improve this kind of regional role of the colleges and also look at improved links between the colleges and the universities. So while I think you're right to raise a general question here, I think it does have to be recognised that a lot of policy at a national level and at an institutional level has been around about this question of articulation and trying to improve the articulation arrangements.
According to the EIS, the time has been reduced. The direct teaching time has been reduced. So does that not put FE students wishing to go on to get a university degree, does that not put them at a disadvantage, and therefore does that not widen the inequalities gap in education?
If I may comment at this stage, I mean, I think that one of the issues that you should think about is that a very high percentage of FE funding comes from this one source, the public sector. In the HE sector, money comes through research, money comes through overseas ventures and through other activities. There is a degree more flexibility to cope with changes in funding than in the FE sector, where a very high 90+% comes from the one source. So when one has this type of reduction, and I think it's undisputed there's something like a 10% reduction in public funding for each of the last 2 years, when one has that type of reduction, I don't believe that it can be covered by efficiencies and reform in structures alone. I believe that there was a scope for a significant move in that direction that will continue to be so. But I think it's inevitable that there will be pressure on numbers and or quality. And when one is also trying to put extra emphasis on young people and the problems of those in unemployment or entering the labour market without skills, then it becomes very difficult to maintain the articulation that you're referring to, maintaining the quality of the provision for those older people and the move in. And the last point I'd make, of course, is that we're still in a situation, though, where one has a fairly large percentage of those graduating at the moment working in jobs that do not require full graduate skills, whereas there are a lot of intermediate level jobs which are effectively being filled by graduates and which are limiting the scope for those coming out with FE educations to deploy the skills they get. So I think this balance between demand and supply in the labour market and the constraints on FE sector are causing an issue that deserves very close attention in order to help this committee advise the government on the prioritisation within the education sector under these limited funding constraints.
Ian MacArthur.
You've talked all, each of you, about the various demands and obviously the budgetary pressures, and that there needing to be a balance. I mean, I think that's clearly accepted. What ministers, and I think John Swinney indicated when he presented the draft budget last week, indicated that it was still the policy of the government for no compulsory redundancies. Given what you've said, particularly Mr Buchanan, about the creative work that's been done in the past to try and manage previous cuts, is that a policy that is achievable, given what is faced by colleges over the next year or so?
I think it can only be achievable if the money is there to support the employment. Whether it's desirable is another matter, and I find it difficult. I did find it difficult as chair of the board to reconcile a desire for no compulsory redundancies, which I think is universal, with the need to manage the teaching resource to be able to deliver the things that we need to do. So, for example, if you had a department who were of an age and willing to take a voluntary severance package, you could lose the ability to deliver one subject, just as a very crude example. So, and as we come into this much tighter period, I think it's going to become increasingly difficult to meet that aspiration.
I mean, I think as Mr. Buchanan has indicated, it is a difficult one it's a difficult circle to square. I think clearly from the point of view of government policy, it is associated with the regionalisation policy and the policy to encourage mergers and collaboration. As I've indicated in my evidence, I think that those kinds of mergers don't necessarily achieve short-term fixes, and they're complex and difficult to do. So, I mean, I think, again, from the point of view of the committee, I think one of the interesting things going into the future will be to look quite carefully at how the whole regionalisation and merger policy is working and what impact it's having.
Okay, Marco Biaggi.
Thank you, Convener. Before I ask my question, Professor Peat, you mentioned a statistic earlier about jobs needing no qualifications in the labour market. I saw you looking down as if you were checking a source for that. I'd just be interested to know what the source is for my own curiosity and further research, if you have that to hand, and if not, can you send it later?
I'm quoting from a paper by Ewart Keep, who is advisor to the Scottish Funding Council, right, which will be published as part of the papers I was putting together.
Excellent.
And he was quoting Francis Green, and Francis Green's paper is Job Quality in Britain, UK CES Praxis paper number 1, okay. 2009.
I'll get the written reference later. The area I wanted to ask about was twofold. A lot of the discussion so far has been on the rightness of priorities and deliverability. The government's two stated priorities, or two of the main stated priorities at least, have been in maintaining the number of student places and in delivering the opportunities for all. Now, we've already touched on that a great deal, perhaps the first half, where it seems like the opinion of the panel is that the issue is not so much losing student places as displacement within student places. So can I ask, in terms of opportunities for all, if you start from a standpoint that this is desirable, and as that is the government's position, is it achievable within the resources that are allocated, as far as you can tell, subject to all the caveats about the figures at the moment?
I'm happy to start there if you want. I mean, again, I would refer you to the written evidence that I have already given you here. And it does seem to me that there are big questions here that we have to ask. They are associated with the fact that young people already are a significant proportion of the college population, and particularly if you look at the proportions of full-timers, they are a very significant proportion. And then that then links to this other question, which is what quality of provision is going to be provided for these young people? Are the colleges going to be able to continue to provide the high level of full-time courses that they currently provide? And/or are they going to be able to provide courses that lead to clearly recognised qualifications that either enable young people to progress to further study or to progress into the labour market with recognised qualifications. I think those are the serious questions that have to be asked. I think we can't give answers to those questions just now, because those are the issues that the colleges are seeking to grapple with. So I think what we have to look for then over the coming years is, what does the evidence show us about what the colleges have been able to achieve here? But what I've said here is, I think there are pretty big questions.
Could I just add one thing? I think Professor Gallagher is perfectly right. But I think as far as taking them into colleges and providing them with some form of learning opportunity, I think that's probably achievable by management. I think the key issue is that colleges, as purveyors largely of vocational training and routes into jobs, rely very, very heavily on links to employers and the availability of jobs. If you're providing apprenticeships, for example, you need jobs. And therefore, the answer to your question lies partly in the ability of the economy to generate more jobs rather than the colleges to generate more places. In the short term, what you will do is you'll soak up people, but within 12 to 18 months, they're going to come back onto the jobs market and they'll have higher expectations than they did when they went in.
I'd be interested in Professor Peate's opinion.
Thank you. I personally have no doubt in the priority that should be accorded to meeting this objective. I think that I'm pleased to see the priorities continuing to early years, because only through the early years agenda will this issue be diminished, but that will take time. I'm also very wary about the fact that the overall macroeconomic environment looks unlikely to improve over the next 12 to 18 months substantially, and that could mean that unemployment may rise further in Scotland and the problems of young unemployed may be accentuated. So I think that all points to the need for the period ahead to work very hard on this. But I certainly agree with Mr. Buchanan's comments and others about the need to find the right positions that people can move into. And that's where I think this issue of what the incentives are for young people is really quite important. Because whereas the incentives work quite well at the top end of the labour market, where there is the motivation to go and find jobs and the expectation of getting a decent uplift in wages and in status and prestige through HE, I think at the lower end, there isn't evidence that the motivation is there, or that the young people react in the same way to whatever spur there may be. So I think one has to try very hard to not just put people into a college to do a course of some sort, but to link it to genuine employment opportunities, and employment opportunities which have a chance of leading to progression and developing people's potential. So I think that it's not just a matter of a numbers game. It's a matter of the quality of what is provided and the link to the employers. That's where this role of FE within the local communities matters. I actually don't see a contradiction between a degree of agglomeration in many aspects of FE and maintaining local presence. I think there can be the efficiency gains with maintaining the local presence. But I think it mustn't be just a numbers game. This has to be trying to develop the skills that are required within the labour market, and also working with employers so they make best use of it. And I just notice en passant that it seems very disappointing that one can still have reports from North East Scotland of major skill shortages in the oil and gas related sector, which I heard from Professor Ian Diamond just 10 days ago, and at the same time have these large numbers of young people with very little prospect ahead of them. That mismatch at this time just seems particularly unfortunate.
Would it be fair, therefore, to characterise your assessment as being that opportunities for all from the side of the colleges is achievable, but the main difficulties lie in the difficult labour market circumstances?
I think that's one element, and the other element is that going for opportunities for all at a time of very severely constrained resources will mean that other aspects of the work of colleges may suffer in the process. And that's why it's extremely important that colleges prioritise as to what is going to work in the economic circumstances that we face.
Could I just add something briefly?
I was going to just ask a question to Professor Gallagher there, so perhaps I could roll the two together.
Is on this specific
Well,
point,
I just wanted very
briefly
briefly to say that I do think that there's a twin issue here. One of the issues is also what is the quality of the provision within the colleges. It may well be the colleges can absorb the numbers, but what is the quality? And that then links to the issue of what happens to them afterwards. So I don't think it's just, you know, what's going on outside. I think there is also an issue of how the quality can be maintained inside as well.
Yes, further to that on opportunities for all. One of the figures that jumped out at me from the evidence that you provided, Professor Gallagher, was the 30% of the headcount taking courses not leading to recognised qualifications. Now, I'm sure we're all aware of the value of the very first step courses, you know, often taken in community centres that open up the aspiration towards further steps, but that does seem to me to be rather high, and that if opportunities for all is causing a realignment, that might not entirely be an unhelpful one. I mean, what does that 30% look like in your opinion, and do you agree that perhaps that's something that should be reconsidered at the moment?
Well, I think that there is definitely a case to try to ensure that as many students as possible gain recognised qualifications as a result of their studies in the colleges. I did include the extra column which looks at the weighted sums, because I think that is actually quite important, because it indicates that if you look at this type of provision in terms of the overall provision within the colleges, it is far, far less than the 30% headline figure indicates. So I think it's very important to have that in mind. I think, I mean, as you have indicated, a significant number of students attending these courses will be undertaking taster courses and similar short courses, which may well be the first steps. Also, some of them may be commercial courses in a sense, you know, so courses where the students are actually paying for the studies of their employers, and they don't necessarily lead to a recognised qualification. So I think we've got to recognise that these figures here, you know, there's a whole load of stuff underneath them. I think the concern in this context would be if we got more of the young people undertaking courses that came into this 30% figure. So if we were bringing in quite a lot of young people, keeping them in the colleges for a relatively short period of time, and then they were leaving without really having significantly improved their qualification base, and that I think is a danger, and it's one that we do want to, I think, keep under close observation.
Thank you. Just for your information, and I know you said earlier on, Professor Peat, about the lack of skills shortage in the North East. The government, of course, did announce £18 million for skills training last week, and part of that will be for an energy academy in the North East to try and address that very skills shortage in the energy sector. So hopefully that will go some way towards filling that particular skills gap. But can I very briefly bring in Neil Finlay and then Liam MacArthur?
Someone I spoke to recently who works in this sector said that they feared that the opportunities for all might be creating what they called a holding corral for the unemployed. Is that a danger that we have people going in a circle through various courses and various programmes with no destination at the end?
Briefly, I think it clearly is a danger. I mean, we don't know that it will happen because we don't have the evidence yet. But it clearly is a danger, and this is why, you know, we do have to look at this very, very carefully. And also, I mean, as I've indicated earlier on, we you know, the most recent figures indicate that 31,000 young people in Scotland were in the not in education, employment or training category. Now, these are young people who are, you know, they are clearly young people who have not been very successful at school already. They are difficult to engage in really, you know, in the whole educational process. So I think we do have to recognise that if you're seeking to bring more young people like that into the system and provide them with high quality education, this is a seriously demanding task for colleges and for the staff within the colleges, and it could have a significant impact on the whole kind of learning culture that, within certain sectors of the colleges.
Briefly, Professor Peake.
Yes, just wanted to say that I think it is a risk, which is why the more that can be done to address the problems that these young people face earlier in their life, the better. The colleges face a very difficult task when they get to people of 16, 17, 18 who've had disadvantage impacting upon them and their motivation, their attitudes for a number of years. And also I note that FE colleges have a lower spend per head than secondary schools, for example. So they're facing a very difficult problem, and there is a severe risk that there will be this recycling, as you say, which is why I believe the more that can be done to work with employers, even very small employers, at an early stage, the better.
Thank you. Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. Just obviously the focus, the government's attached to 16 to 19, and I suppose the next age group up is very evident. But I think all of you have talked about the impact that this will have in terms of the other work of colleges, and particularly the reskilling needs of those of an older age. I mean, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. But is your view that there needs to be a rebalancing in terms of the priority, in which case I suppose a case could be argued for that being achieved within the current budget constraints? Or do you believe that there needs to be action taken to address the needs of older learners, where the implication presumably would be that additional budgetary resources need to be secured to achieve that? Bearing in mind the latter is exceptionally difficult in the current circumstances, what would your view be on where the committee ought to be applying pressure on ministers?
Could I just say something there? That I mean, I think you're absolutely right to highlight it, and if you hadn't, I would have done. I think that one of the things we haven't really answered as a country is the what-if question about further education, because it actually does a lot of things to a lot of different people, and we haven't managed to capture that and bottle it, and I think that's a challenge, and I think that's something that we need to look at. And to some extent, the outcomes-driven approach that we're following now will start us down the road of identifying what we should be doing, and a lot of that should be done at local level, perhaps not at regional level. And one of the values that I think that one of the things that we undervalue in terms of colleges is its role in ensuring a flexible and mobile labour force of people in employment, and not just the people who are entrants into the labour force and school leavers, which we have concentrated on, and which government policy, I think quite rightly for now, does focus on. But let's never lose sight of the fact that over 50% of college students are over 25. The average age is 32. And therefore, the job that they do in the wider economy is extremely valuable, and I don't think we capture that and acknowledge that, or even fully understand its role in flexibility and mobility, which will help generate economic growth in the future. So I think it's certainly something to consider as the level of priority given to younger and older learners.
Yes, I certainly, again, I've indicated this in my written evidence. I think we do have to bear in mind that the colleges, as Mr. Buchanan has said, have been very successful in providing second chance routes for many older students, many, especially women, to enable them to gain qualifications to re-enter the labour market. I think it's very important that role of the colleges is clearly recognised and is maintained. And if an emphasis on the younger age group were to make it more difficult for the colleges to carry out that role, I think this would be an unfortunate consequence.
Okay, briefly. The time is moving on rapidly, and I want to certainly do some questions on the HE sector, if you don't mind. But before we do that, can I bring in Claire Adamson, and then I'll finish with Neil Bibby, and then we'll move on to the HE.
There's been a bit of discussion about, excuse my voice, a bit of discussion about regionalisation already, and obviously there's other models in the rest of the UK, and I think Wales are going down an option of merger without consultation, if you like, on the colleges. Given that we have a number of regionalisation models, can you maybe give us an idea of how the budget allocations have shaped the colleges' preparations for the regionalisation? And Professor Gallagher, you specifically talked about it's not a short-term fix, but maybe a little bit about what can be done in the long terms in terms of regionalisation and tackling some of the issues about targeting in specific areas.
Well, as you know, we are at an early stage of the regionalisation policy in Scotland. There are different aspects to this, because I mean we've got both a sort of merger process underway and a regionalisation process, and I think that does make it quite a complex one. Because in a sense, what the government and the funding council, on behalf of the government, are now trying to sort of manage is this complex process of both merger and regionalisation, and to some extent, it will be easier to achieve the long-term objectives of regionalisation once the merger processes have gone through more fully. But even they won't be necessarily be realised. I mean, I think I've quoted the example of Glasgow in my paper. With the best will in the world, we're going to be left, I think, with 3 colleges in Glasgow for some very significant period into the future. So we are going to be left with some regions which are clearly single college regions, and it will be relatively straightforward on one level what the role of the regional board will be. But then we're going to have other regions. I think Glasgow is the outstanding example of that, which will be very large, complex regions. So I think there is a great deal of merit, I think, in seeking some restructuring of the whole college sector in Scotland. I think at present it's a very complex process, and again I think where it is leading to is still a bit unclear at the moment.
If I can make a brief comment. Many years ago, I was chair of what was called the Strategic Change Grant Committee at SHEFCO, which actually covered both HE and FE. And we had a paucity of demands for funding because the universities, the HE and the FE sector, was not keen on any form of getting together and preferred the status as was. I regretted that, and I am now pleased to see that there are moves to look for efficient changes in the delivery. But at the same time, one has to note that this costs money up front, and money up front is in short supply. And one has to try and balance again this difficult issue of having the right funds for the investment in the change so that it's done properly in order to maximize the benefits, not just in cost savings, but in what is delivered to students. So it is not easy. And I think the balance of investment funds against recurrent funds will be another issue that the FE sector will have to tackle.
And just very briefly, I think that I've never fully understood why there were too many colleges and not too many schools, or I never really understood why colleges were seen to be in greater abundance than needed. I think the regionalisation agenda, at the moment, the way it's shaped up at the moment, appears to be a way of more efficiently delivering funding. I think it achieves that aim, and that's one of the Funding Council aims. I'm not convinced as yet it answers learner needs better, and this is supposed to be a learner-centric policy. And I think there are a lot of questions hanging over whether it answers learner needs better. I think secondly, I think there are some governance issues at local level as well. I think there's a need for greater accountability at local level from colleges, and I think local colleges need to be able to answer their communities about learner needs, and they don't do that now, and they're going to be doing that even less under the new system.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned that the current priorities and budget settlements will make it more difficult to provide courses for older adults, older learners. Do you envisage that the cuts that we are seeing and the cut in the teaching grant that you mentioned is being proposed will result in a reduction of courses for older learners and, for example, adults with learning disabilities? Also, I'd like to ask, in terms of economic recovery, John Henderson, I believe, of Scotland's colleges, said in the Herald last week that an educated and skilled workforce is key to economic recovery. Generally speaking, I know there's lots of issues, but generally speaking, do you believe that cuts to colleges harm economic recovery?
Shall I kick off on that one? As one part of the work we've been doing, we've asked the Fraser of Allender Institute to look at the impact of the FE sector on the economy. And it is clear that there is a significant contribution that comes. Something like over 8 years, 1% of GDP is attributable to the FE sector, which is a substantial portion of activity. And I certainly believe that to be well placed for the economic recovery, we have to have the skills in place of the type and in the location that's required. So I don't doubt that. The difficulty is that with limited funding, a choice is having to be made to some extent at the priority to dealing with the young, the opportunities for all, as compared to the skill development of those at older ages. You know, one can't avoid the fact that with limited budgets, even with the most efficiency gains that can be pushed through, to some extent a choice will be made. Now that choice will be on the quality of provision for one group or the other or both, or the numbers that are provided. And if there is a guarantee on the numbers under the opportunities for all, then the pressure will be there at the top of the system. But that is a policy issue, as I see it, that the choice has to be made about what the priorities are. And the only way around it is to allocate more funds. That is on the assumption that efficiency gains are being maximised over the period. So if more funds are not allocated, then there will be pressure that is visible in one way or another, quite possibly, on the skills development of those of an older age.
Yes, I mean, I think, you know, I would certainly agree with Professor Pete that there are going to have to be choices made here. One of my concerns in that process is that we do not lose some of the things that colleges have been extremely good at doing. And colleges have been extremely good at providing re-entry routes for older learners and opportunities for them to gain new qualifications and skills. So if, as a result of some of these choices, it was more difficult for colleges to do that, I think that would be a significant loss in terms of the evidence of what colleges have been successful at doing.
Since it's Mary Scanlon's first appearance at the committee, I will indulge a very, very, very brief question, Mary.
Probably be my last, but it's just that Professor Gallagher, convener, has mentioned today several times about the 31,000 16 to 19-year-olds out of work and out of training. And I'm finding that difficult to reconcile with the government's policy that every 16 to 18-year-old is offered a training place, education, etc. So, you know, why have we got 31,000 when they're all being offered something that was never offered to previous generations? And what happens to them now?
That figure is the most recent government figure. So I suppose what the government is saying is, as a result of its new policies, it is seeking to ensure that. But their policies are only really now, I think, starting to have their impact. So I think what the government would be saying is that they would hope that figure will come down as a result of that. But I think what is important is that this 31,000 represents the young people who are most difficult to engage in education, employment, or training. So, you know, it's an indication of I think of the scale of the challenge associated with this guarantee.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to move on to HE now, if members don't mind. So can I ask the next question to come from Marco Biaggi?
A great deal of heat was expended over the summer in the media about concerns over Scottish students being able to get places in university, even though this is the first year where they are not actually directly competing against the rest of UK students that apparently are forcing them out. Could you give your views, those of you who have a particularly impassioned view on higher education, about the impact of that new funding system and differentiation between Scottish and RUK students on the availability of places for Scottish students?
Well, I mean, if you look at the evidence from about applications this year, which is I think the most kind of the most recent quality data that we've got, Scotland has undoubtedly done much better than the rest of the UK in that respect. Applications to English universities have declined very significantly this year, whereas applications to Scottish universities there's been a very, very small decline. So insofar as that is evidence, it's that's the evidence that we have at the present time. And there's clearly been, I think, a high level of application from international students to Scottish universities this year.
Professor Peat, perhaps?
Well, the only comment I would make is that looking from the perspective of the HE institution, the incentives that they face to take in different students or undertake different activities have been changed as a result of the policies introduced in this country and in England and indeed in Wales and elsewhere. So I think one has to see from the perspective of those HE institutions that there are advantages for them in overseas activity and overseas students from out with the EU, which help them at a time when their resources are, as everyone else, constrained. So I think it's inevitable that that will have some impact on their decisions. And I think what one has to do with the Scottish policy is try and make sure that the end product is not any loss of access for Scottish students as a result of the changed incentives that face the institutions.
Maybe a question for the next panel.
Perhaps. Moving on then, Neil Finlay.
It's just in relation to the talk about the funding gap between Scottish and English universities. How do you see that, and what's the impact of it?
If I can just very briefly say that the latest figures I've seen are for 2010-11, and certainly it seems to be the case that the spend per head on HE in Scotland is significantly higher than any of the other three nations of the UK. And of course that is per year, and with the 4-year course in many instances it's the gap in total spending on each graduate may look higher. I am all in favour of strong HE availability for Scottish students and that continuing, but I just think it is worth all the time bearing in mind the cost that involves in public finance as compared to alternative models, and where the pressures are falling as a result of the funds that are allocated to meeting this particular sector's requirements.
Okay, when you mention alternative models, Professor Peat, what are you specifically thinking about?
This is obviously very contentious ground, and I don't in any way wish to tread on any toes. What I'm saying is that you are facing, as an education committee, the difficulties that are there over FEs delivering at both ends of the spectrum in this very difficult times. And at the same time, you have an HE sector which is continuing to be relatively well funded, and where the model is different from that in other nations of the UK, which places particular pressures. I'm just saying that over time, I believe that one will have to consider whether, even if only at the margin, there needs to be some adjustment in order to make sure that all the objectives of education activity can be achieved to the best value for the Scottish economy. I don't particularly want to go beyond that.
No, but I'm just curious because clearly it's an important point you make. I mean, doesn't the evidence, though, of the application figures fall in England as opposed to what's happening here in Scotland perhaps make you reconsider the view that you've just expressed?
Well, it certainly makes me feel that the way that fees have gone in England may well be counterproductive for the benefit of the English economy. And I would not in any way be supporting the scale of fees that have been put into place there. But one is, I think one always has to be prepared to consider whether there are marginal adjustments that can be made that can help achieve the overall set of objectives that are being set.
Okay, thank you for that. Mary Scanlon.
Yes, I wonder if I can ask a question. Given the 25% cut in the teaching grant to further education, and given that further education now teach to degree level, and have been doing so for considerable time, I was teaching that in 1994, so it's... in terms of funding, does the same funding go to further education for teaching a degree course as goes to a university for teaching a degree course? And if not, could you tell me what the difference is? And can I just pitch in that HNC and HND and for an articulated student are degree courses? So can you tell me why there's such a cut, such a disparity, and what the figures are at national level?
I can certainly tell you that there is a major difference. Again, as with so many of these issues to do with funding, I'm not actually prepared to tie myself to any mast in terms of what the actual figure is. I think, you would be best placed to ask the Funding Council, who can give you an official response to that question. And that's a perfectly reasonable question to ask the Funding Council. There clearly is a gap there. It is a historical gap, and it reflects issues to do with, in a sense, how what has been viewed as the role of the university sector by comparison with the college sector, and some of which you referred to in to do with the research roles of universities and associated issues. So there clearly is a major funding difference there.
So why are colleges expected to teach to degree level to a degree that is equal, allegedly, to a university degree? So why are they expected to teach to the same degree level with, I know you can't give me a figure, but I think you said the word a significant gap.
Well,
is that...
That again is a policy issue. I think you're better placed to ask that question to the people who are responsible for those policy decisions.
I'm sure your colleague will raise that with the Funding Council and the Cabinet Secretary in the coming weeks, Mary. George Adam.
Yes, I'd just like to ask the reaction to the new package of student support. Obviously, it's been protected. Just want to know your views on it.
One would welcome. You're talking about the commitment to the £7,000 a year.
The support.
Yes, I think one would welcome that from a student perspective. I think again, going back to some of the issues that have been referred to earlier on, there are policy choices here in relation to any of these issues. And there are, so in a sense, the finding the funding for a package of student support like that clearly has got implications elsewhere in the budget. So I think we have to I think clearly recognise that none of these decisions are without costs.
But we agree that a fully supported student, a happy student, and goes on and be all he can be, or she can be.
Well, hopefully that we all agree on that, hopefully, yes. Mr Buchanan.
That's perhaps stretching the imagination slightly, happy students. I think what it does do is it addresses some of the equalities issues and about access, and I think for the mainstream it's welcome, but I think particularly mainstream for people who perhaps find it harder to access further or higher education. So I think in that respect, certainly on the equalities side, I think it's welcome, yes.
Neil Findlay?
Yeah, if I were to ask you, and I'm not asking you to give me the answer, but if I was to ask you what your income was, right, you would tell me what your salary was and all the shares that you've got and the income you get from your holiday home in France and all that type of stuff. But you wouldn't tell me how much you get from, or how much you owe in loans. So the government packages this up as a minimum income guarantee. This is not an income, it's a loan. Do you agree with that?
Does anybody wish to express an opinion on
Would
that?
would any of the panel regard a loan that they have, God forbid you might have one, as your income?
I think that's
knows the answer.
Probably, I think we've got no response on that. Listen, gentlemen, thank you very much for your appearance this morning and for your evidence. Can I thank you for taking the time to come along this morning, and can I suspend briefly to allow witnesses to change? Welcome back, and can I welcome to the committee our second panel this morning, who will provide the Union's reaction to the draft budget for FE and HE. Can I welcome to the committee this morning David Belsley, National Officer, Further and Higher Education, the Educational Institute of Scotland, Robin Parker, President of NUS Scotland, Emma Phillips, Regional Organiser of Unison, and Mary Senior, Scottish Official, University and College Union Scotland. Good welcome to you all. Just for a variety in the spice of life, we're going to start on HE this time and do it the other way around. So can I begin with Marco Biaggi?
Well, I'll go back to the question I asked to the previous panel. There's been concern expressed about potential competition between Scottish and rest of UK students, given the changes to the funding system, even though that funding system means that they're not directly competing against each other for the same quota of places for the first time. And I noticed this was something that was raised in the EIS submission. So I would like to hear views on whether there is such competition, given, as I say, that they are separated from the one quota of places for the first time, and how broadly the funding package will impact on access for Scottish students in terms of number of places.
Robin, do you wish to start?
Well, thank you first of all for having the opportunity to be here and speak on these subjects. Scottish places have been protected. That's definitely a good thing. I think the questions really have to become about who those places are open to. And I think there's a lot of questions we need to talk about. We need to good news that there's plans to bring forward legislation on this issue, but we need to look at what that legislation is, so that we are working with universities, working across the Parliament to really widen access and change the face of who those people are from Scotland who take up those places. I think we've discussed, and I've discussed with this committee before, what I think about the RUK funding package, and I think the current situation goes beyond the situation that we have south of the border. So I think there's a huge room for improvement in terms of improving that package. In terms of the package for Scottish students, I think it's a really good one. The fact that we don't have tuition fees in Scotland, alongside the student support announcement over the summer, gives us the framework with which to make that big improvement in access that I was talking about earlier. And I think the question of whether there is a funding gap with universities south of the border, that's a question that's closed now.
Mary Senior?
Thanks very much also for coming to the committee to speak on this subject today. As Robin said, Scottish places are protected. However, I think we're into an unknown area really in terms of the new system that was introduced this year. I think as the previous evidence witnesses indicated, there's different incentives for universities to take on different students. Now, UCU was really concerned with the way the rest of UK fee system was introduced last year, and I think it's really disappointing that there wasn't more debate within, I think, this Parliament and broadly about other options to the RUK fees regime, because really we've introduced a market into Scottish education, because it's very clear that there's incentives for institutions to take on more RUK students because they bring the funding into the system. And to be fair, I guess, trade unions are also using that too, because clearly it's an income, and I think it's disappointing to see English, Welsh and Irish and Northern Irish students being used in some senses as a cash cow, and having a different levels of students in our institutions. And I think we're going to see the tensions that are going to play out as that moves forward. But in terms of other issues around access, I think the new proposals that have been introduced in terms of student support are very welcome for Scottish students, and I think that's something that clearly we're supporting.
Well, if I can start on the EIS, so once again, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting the EIS to give evidence. I think there's no doubt that the Scottish Government and the Scottish Funding Council have gone some way into protect the places for Scottish students, and not only protected the university places for Scottish students, but also assisted with no tuition fees and student support. The the other side of the coin is that the ways in which different students from different parts of the world are brought in and with their differing amounts of money also makes it attractive for universities to have as many non-EU students as possible. And depending at the rate at which the university charges its UK fees, compared to what the SFC is paying for a particular subject within that university, some UK students may be more attractive to a Scottish university in certain subjects than others. There is therefore something that we've highlighted in the EIS evidence, in that we are somewhat concerned that whilst our UK students can in some cases bring in more money, and that may encourage universities to recruit or that type of student rather than a Scottish student. And also remember that whilst the funding for Scottish students is capped, is quoted, it's a finite number, it's also based on on each university having the student applicants with the right entry requirements. And consequently, it's not a case of just filling it up with Scottish students. And that also has got to be played against what other candidates from other parts of the world who may have higher qualifications.
Before we move on, can I just, maybe you want to clarify, but I'd like to clarify exactly what you just said, Mr Billingsley. Student places from those who are domiciled in Scotland are protected. Do you agree with that? That's the case?
The funding is protected, yes.
You seem to be suggesting that somehow those places were available for students from elsewhere.
No, what I'm saying is that universities recruit students according to the number of applications they have and according to the qualifications that those students have.
If Scottish domiciled students don't apply, then, well, they don't apply. That's
exactly, so those places then would not be, those places could be filled by other students.
Sorry, Marco.
I think what I'm concerned about and what I'm puzzled by, frankly, is this perception that there's competition and indeed a tension, to use one of the words that was marked there, because if you have places set aside for Scottish students, as we have, with the EU issue left aside for a moment, we have one category there. And so whether a university recruits 5 rest of UK students or 500 rest of UK students, those places are still there. And if that availability is set and international students can be brought in, or rest of UK students can be brought in, and perhaps they become an important part of the funding arrangements for a university, where is the loss to the Scottish student? I don't see what is at risk here. And indeed, we've seen, in particular over the last 10 years, a huge expansion in international students in Scottish universities at no cost to Scottish students, and certainly great benefit in terms of cosmopolitan atmosphere in the universities and their successes internationally. So if you could explain what this tension is, I would be very grateful.
Well, perhaps I can start by saying the first thing is that our UK being uncapped was from 2012 onwards. So it's the first year, so we don't know what the outcome of that will be. You are quite right in that, as I was saying at the start, the Scottish Government has gone some way in seeking to protect the number of places for Scottish students by having the number of funded places, as you pointed out. What we're trying to do is point out scenarios in which those tensions within universities are created, particularly if the university are concentrating on revenue.
What tensions? Yes.
Well, different students from different parts of the world bring in different amounts of money.
Indeed.
More money.
But does that have an impact on availability of places for Scottish students if there is a finite set, to use an unpopular term, ring-fenced number of places for those Scottish students? I can't see how there's a tension there.
I think it doesn't affect the places issue. I think it does. It brings up other issues. I think it's not good. You highlighted the cosmopolitanness, coin a phrase, of a campus being a good thing for everyone. But if we've seen changes to where students come from, we've seen a change in the student demographic as a result of tuition fees in England. We don't know what the demographic of students coming from the rest of the UK to Scotland, how that's going to change as a result of our UK fees. And that's clearly bad for the student experience overall. And I think it is something, I think the Scottish Parliament has a responsibility for Scottish universities and the overall success of Scottish universities and the overall pool of students wherever they come from.
But I take it then that you would, not wanting to put words in your mouth, but you would perhaps agree with me that the actual availability of places for Scottish domicile students is unaffected by the changes. The number of places available for Scottish domicile students is unchanged.
And the number of Scottish EU places has been protected from what it used to be. If anything, actually, I think the conversations we should be having about that is how we, whether there's opportunity, whether it's from universities, whether it's from government, to increase those number of places, and the question about who those people are.
I'm just trying to clarify that point. Sorry, Mary Senior wanted to go in here.
I mean, I guess I use the word tension. I guess it's saying St Andrews or Edinburgh, you've got one student paying £9,000, you've got another student from domiciled in Scotland who is not paying tuition fees. So clearly, you know, that the student paying £9,000 is investing a great deal. And I think we don't know how that is going to play out. Is it going to put more pressures on lecturers and other university staff because the person that is there really as a consumer has got higher expectations or you know, or different expectations? And I think that's a concern. I think that's, you know, we really don't know how that's going to play out and the pressures that's going to put on the learning environment in our universities.
Are there any lessons that we can draw on perhaps the last decade of the expansion of international students who pay routinely £15,000 per year for many courses in terms of the incentives and the pressures?
I guess they're coming from a different area, you know, they're not paying the same taxes as, you know, everyone is paying in the UK. So I think it's a wee bit different to talk about international students. You know, surely it's very welcome that we do have, you know, we're an internationally renowned higher education sector and we're able to attract international students. That's clearly a good thing.
Yes, you've moved it from the, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you said that the sort of tensions that you were concerned about was the fact that those students from the rest of the UK who were paying £9,000, for example, the tension would be that they were consumers and maybe had higher expectations or different expectations from those from Scottish domicile students. And then you went on to say it seemed to be that those paying £15,000 or more from elsewhere, non-EU students, that didn't seem to be a problem. I mean, surely they're consumers.
Sorry, convener. I mean, I think it's very different to talk about students that are, as you say, out with the EU, you know, in different legislatures, in different tax systems to people in the UK, when at the moment, you know, clearly we've got a United Kingdom. I think it is very different.
Can I possibly give an example of a theoretical tension that may come in at a university? Let's say a university is running a chemistry degree course and there are 50 funded places for Scots or Scottish domicile students. And the entries is, let's say, 20, the tariff to get into that course is 20 UCAS points. Now, the university can stick as many students into that chemistry course as it wants. It can give 50 places to any student, a Scottish student that meets the UCAS tariff, and then put in extra. But ultimately, there's always going to be a finite number of chemistry students. Or it could raise the tariff. It could raise the UCAS tariff to 25 and make it more difficult for Scots to get in. Less likely, therefore, to reach your funding. And you could fund, and you could then fill out that course with extra overseas students that bring significantly more money than Scottish students. Now, that's a theoretical tension that could exist. And this is the type of theoretical conversation that we're having now. At the moment, there is no evidence. No, there is no evidence of that. And this is why we're talking about theoretical tensions.
With regard to your hypothetical example, I'm not sure, but I would think the teaching grant per head for a science student in chemistry is possibly slightly higher than 9,000, so it would actually be more profitable for them to have the Scottish students in that course.
Students from non-EU, 12, 15, 16,000 a year. That's what you're competing against, isn't it?
That's the non-EU issue, yes.
Yeah.
That's a long-standing one. But we did have I believe I recall from when the principals came in over the issue of rest of UK fees, they were actually concerned that 9,000 wasn't enough for courses like medicine or science, technology, engineering, and perhaps creating an incentive for funding for universities to move the Scottish domicile students into those courses where they would get a higher grant from the SFC is no bad thing.
Yeah, that's a possibility. There are many possibilities that can play out.
And just briefly, I think the conclusion from all of this is that when you bring in a market, it gets messy. So actually, what we shouldn't have done was, well, I don't think we should have been charging fees at all. I don't think you should be charging fees wherever you come from. Except the Scottish Government was forced to do something, but they certainly didn't have to introduce a marketised system that has a higher fee level and has fewer access protections, which is currently what we're left with. But this is really a problem to do with the market, and the clearing issue was also fundamentally a problem with the market. It was mischaracterised a lot in the press, but fundamentally it was a market.
Thank you. I realise, Emma Phillips, we've gone a slightly sidetracked there with that tension, theoretical or otherwise, but Emma Phillips, did you want to contribute to the original question?
I don't think I've got any further to add to that.
Okay, we'll move on. We've got other people wanting to come in. First of all, Liam MacArthur and then Claire Adamson.
It may have just been touched on there in the last exchange with between Marco and David Belty, but from the evidence that, the written evidence you've provided and what you're saying this morning, it doesn't seem to be an issue in relation to the global total of places for Scots domicile students, and indeed doesn't seem to be necessarily a problem with individual institutions. But the concern you seem to be highlighting is that the demographic and the makeup on each course may be worth further scrutiny. I think you say HEIs may be tempted to move funded Scottish places to lower tariff courses, to be over-eager to put our UK non-EU students into courses that have not been able to fill the Scottish students' funded quota. Is that the issue that you're talking about course by course or department by department, rather than the overall Scots domiciled student places, which I think were agreed are subject to the cap, and therefore there will be strong incentives to meet or achieve that number?
Yes, I think we are. I mean, I think, as your colleague pointed out, if chemistry, it may be beneficial to put your Scottish students in, but for courses receiving lower tariff, it may not be. But again, these are theoretical concerns that may or may not play out over time. I think that, to stress what I said at the very start, the Scottish Government has made significant effort to protect the number of Scottish students, and we acknowledge that.
Thank you. Claire Adamson and then Mary Scanlon.
Just, excuse my voice, a couple of concerns about some of the things that have been said. The sort of theoretical tension. I fail to see why the introduction of the rest of the UK into that equation makes that any different from what would be there at the moment with international students, in that scenario. And also this aspect of the student as a consumer, and somehow the relationship between Scottish students and rest of UK students has changed and is now considered different in the universities. So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper on that, given that, you know, the Scottish students are funded by the Scottish Government. And this idea of the introduction of marketisation is very difficult, because introduction of marketisation was introduction of tuition fees down south and not in Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You know, it was down south that introduced the fees and that has brought the situation that we're in Scotland. However, until this academic year, rest of UK students were in the general student numbers that were capped. So, you know, they've been taken out of those cap numbers. So it is, you know, it is very, very different. And, you know, I think prior to the introduction of our UK fees, rest of UK students paid a generic flat fee. I think it was around about, you know, £1,800 a year. So again, you know, that's why it's very different, and I think that's why we've introduced it at the market into Scotland for our UK students.
Anyone else wish to contribute to this comment? No. Well, Claire Adamson, did you have any more? Right. Joan?
Yeah, first of all, can I apologise for my late arrival? Unfortunately, it was the traffic on the M8 because of the weather. Acknowledge that you know, I think this is fairly broad acknowledgement that this situation has been caused by the introduction of market by the UK government. And given what you've said, I wondered whether you could come forward to solutions to the problems that you perceive and whether you've costed those solutions.
I'd be happy to send a sort of further briefing around the committee about this issue, and I think we should certainly return to it in this forum when it comes back to the post-16 legislation, when it goes through the Parliament. We came forward a number of proposals, I think different things you could do. Well, first of all, we could have gone for a flat fee across different courses. Previously, what we've had was just an idea. I'm not saying any of these are the right solution, but just want to make clear that there are more different options. There's no justification for the fact that we have a possibility of even higher degree costs than we do down south. No justification for the fact that there are fewer access support protections for students. There's nothing that's the equivalent of the Office of Fair Access as that there is down south. There's no equivalent of the bursary requirements that protects. So I think there were a number of range of different options that didn't introduce the market system, and that would have protected access better and didn't result in an even higher fee level. I'm happy to send those around, but that's different from the argument that fundamentally the problem does come from the Westminster government's decisions.
Mary, apologies, I should have brought you in there first, but apologise for that.
Convener, to follow a line of questioning that I asked earlier, and that was about articulation, and in the EIS document, I find it in page 8 and 9, and really the incentive to encourage articulation or favour Scottish students from poorer backgrounds may be weak. I find that very worrying. And at the top of page 9, the EIS doesn't believe that the government is seeking to use the HE sector to respond to the challenges of youth unemployment, and that there's been limited efforts to improve articulation from colleges and improve access for poorer students. Before coming here, I lectured economics for 20 years in FE and higher education, and FE was always a great way for students of different ages and from many disadvantaged backgrounds to sign up for a year or 2 years and to go on. And I just would like to ask more clarification on that, because to me that's a huge cause of concern in terms of inequalities. But also I'm concerned, given the background of the 25% cut in the FE teaching budget, will students from FE be able to pitch in to year 3 of a degree? I don't know, I'm a substitute for today, so I don't have the same background as the rest of my colleagues. But what you're stating here, to me, is a serious matter.
Yes, I think so. I think that the first part was a theoretical concern in which we were highlighted within the paper possible concerns around the funding model, around marketisation within HE, and I think that's what page 8 refers to. Now, in terms of page 9, I think we're coming to where we are at rather than a theoretical concern. I think the first thing to say is that the EIS favours articulation as much as possible, and that the learner journey from the FE college to university should be as seamless as possible. The government has made some efforts to improve articulation, development of articulation hubs, the development and the funding of the articulation hubs, but they are in the main to post-92 universities, and the university's participation within those hubs was voluntary. The second thing is that the government has expanded articulation by including it as a target in the outcome agreements with universities. We in the EIS haven't seen these outcome agreements. We don't know how rigid the targets are. We don't know what the penalties are for missing the targets. I think that last year there was publication showing that for whatever reason, the numbers of Scottish students from the bottom 40% of postcodes was lower within Scotland than in England, which was a cause for concern. The comment that the EIS does not believe that the government is seeking to use the HE sector to respond to the challenge of youth unemployment comes in many ways from the government's pre-legislative paper on education, where it paints quite a high-end picture of higher education, one in which research-driven, affecting the culture of Scotland, and in which is clearly producing graduates and a knowledge-based economy. Whereas within that document, it was looking at the FE sector to train 16 to 19-year-olds to refocus the FE sector on providing training for work and for providing skills for employment. Whereas if you read what the pre-legislative paper says about HE, it's not about providing skills for employment, it's not about providing training to find posts. Obviously, having said that, clearly graduates do have an ability to get, you would hope, more skilled posts. But that wasn't the express purpose of it within the pre-legislative paper. Consequently, I think that the EIS does believe that the youth unemployment strategy is being dealt through the opportunities for all guarantees and the such like employability initiatives run through the FE sector rather than in the HE sector. Answers.
Before I bring in Emma Phillips, can I just follow up? I'm sorry I'm having a bad morning this morning, but I'm failing to understand your response, Mr. Belsey. I mean, I don't understand the interpretation you placed upon that paper. Given you yourself have just said that it talks about growing the knowledge economy, increasing graduate employment, it's about improving research, it's about developing those high-end skills. I'm not quite sure how that somehow equates to the sentence which says it does not, the EIS does not believe that the government is seeking to use the HE sector to respond to the challenge of youth unemployment.
The other way of looking at it would be that the FE sector is directly supporting individuals, whereas the HE sector is creating a better Scotland that would allow opportunities to take, would allow individuals to take opportunities from a larger economy driven by more successful universities. There is a step difference. The universities aren't taking in unemployed people or people not in training or not in employment, and they're not giving them extra training. FE colleges are.
I was unemployed when I started to become a student. It was a long time ago, I accept, but I'm sure you know, being unemployed isn't a barrier to acceptance at university, is it?
Most students go into university straight from school. And another problem with the articulation is that, for example, there are barriers to people, students who complete HNCs, HNDs, going over and starting the third or second year. Very often, people who carry out the HND have got to repeat a year at certain universities, whilst they don't at other universities. That's another barrier to articulation that has not yet been addressed by the Scottish Funding Council or the Scottish Government.
A different point from the point that I was trying to pin you down on, which was you seem to, you don't seem to be suggesting, you're suggesting very directly that the HE sector is not, somehow does not assist with youth employment. I mean, I'm struggling to understand how people going to university, coming out with a degree, doesn't assist that.
The purpose of the university sector, as set out in the pre-legislative paper, is, as you outlined yourself, is to create a knowledge-driven economy with high-end research, with the culture and ethos of Scotland being affected by these institutions. It doesn't seem to be from the paper to produce graduates for employment. It seems to be talking about creating graduates who are more balanced individuals with the having had the culture and opportunity of attending a four-year university course.
I'll stop there, but Joan McAlpine, I think, has got a question.
Curious as to whether you seem to be saying that the driving a knowledge economy through centres of excellence and the economic role of universities, which is widely recognised. You seem to be saying that that's a mistake.
We're not saying it's a mistake. What we're saying is that the driving of universities is not going to deliver work for 16-year-olds directly, or additional training opportunities for 16-year-olds who have no qualifications.
Surely a measure that's designed to create a knowledge economy and boost productivity and research across Scotland is obviously going to boost the whole economy and benefit everyone.
Everyone as a consequence, yes. Not specifically youth unemployment.
Yeah. I mean, the QS World University Rankings published this month had 3 Scottish universities appearing in the top 100 universities in the world for the first time as a result of that policy. Do you think that that's wrong? Would you rather compromise that?
I think we're not looking at the same thing, to be honest with you. What the statement here in the EIS evidence is saying that whilst FE colleges are taking in the unemployed 16 to 19-year-olds from the street and giving them the opportunities of retraining, of developing their skills, and that's what the government is paying colleges to do, opportunities for all. The HE sector isn't being used in the same way. Now, clearly, we believe that investment in the HE sector is a good thing. Clearly, we want as many universities in the top 100 in QS, 200 in the Times Higher, whatever measure you like to use. We're not saying in any way that's a bad thing, but we are talking specifically about youth unemployment for those people of between 16 and 19 who are not in training, who are not in employment.
I'm struggling to see the relevance of that, but I mean, Emma Phillips, you wanted to comment, and then Robin Parker.
So I'm representing Unison here, and Unison represents the support staff in colleges and universities, or the so-called back office staff that have are okay to cut because they're back office staff, and much of the savings could have been made. And I just want to explain how that is actually impacting on the journey, the learner's journey through colleges and into universities, and what that means. In terms of at school and people who are wanting to return to work or wanting to go to college, we provide pre-course guidance. Our members provide pre-course guidance to try and get people on the right course in the first place. That has massively been cut. There are the cuts in admissions officers, the cuts in all these, in many of these other posts with various different titles, means that people are not getting the right guidance to go into the right course in the first place. When they do get onto a course, the cuts in our members mean that it's difficult to get hold of their bursaries, it's difficult to get hold of their childcare allowance, their transport costs, which means that we believe there's a large dropout rate within the first 2 weeks because A, they're on the wrong course, and B, they've not had the funding appropriate to be able to deliver them onto the course and to facilitate them. So even the people who want to get onto courses are not getting onto are not beginning them, and they're not counted in the normal dropout rates because they drop out within the first 2 weeks. Added to which, when they're on the course, we again provide support to them on their courses. We've got an example of which is we're a great deal concerned that the opening hours are not the same in a number of buildings, and they're cut back, and this stops part-time workers, people who have families returning to colleges. Carnegie College has reduced from 4 nights a week to 2 nights a week and is not open on Saturdays anymore. There's a number of other examples. Most colleges are cutting their opening hours in direct contradiction.
To interrupt you, I mean, we're discussing HE just now. We are going to come on to FE specifically.
But my point is that all these people who would be doing their HNC and HND through these routes in part-time places are not getting them. They cannot access them. New Inverness College is being built without a nursery, so if you have childcare responsibilities, you can't get onto your HND or HNC courses because you can't do it. The guidance for people, the careers guidance for people leaving colleges, if you're an HND or an HNC student, it seems there's actually a debate between Skills Development Scotland and the colleges who should be providing. They've both received massive cuts. They're both saying you've got to provide the careers advice, and that's resulting in no careers advice being provided. Langside College had a full-time person providing 5 days a week careers advice. There's now half a day for all the Langside students. So people who want to move on to degree courses are not getting the advice and the guidance to do so.
Thanks, sir. I misunderstood what you were saying there. I apologise. Robin Parker.
We published a report over the summer about how we widen access to universities, and I think that really resonates with all this. There's a lot of universities are doing for youth unemployment already, but there are more things that they could be doing. One of the things would be around widening access and looking at who they take. Now, the kind of places that they can find those people from deprived backgrounds, a huge amount of potential isn't just in schools, it is also in colleges, whether that's through articulation, but also we shouldn't overlook people who studied at an FE level, whether that's hires or SVQs in colleges. Universities could be looking into that a lot more. And also universities take a lot of people directly, a lot of older students directly into, and that helps with the whole scene, I think, with the labour market. Things that I think can happen, I think universities really need to be pushed on their commitments around articulation through these outcome agreements that are being made between the Funding Council and universities. They should be pushed on the number of students they're taking from colleges and on particularly the number they are taking at the right level of the SCQF, so they're making the right progression through and are on a 4-year degree rather than a 6-year degree. And I think the last thing, I think there's an opportunity with this current budget that we're talking about to actually equalise the amount of funding that colleges receive to deliver HNCs and HNDs and equalise that amount of funding with what universities receive to do first and second year. It's the same level of study, should receive the same amount of funding. That would create a fairness thing. So I think that's an opportunity that we can still look through this budget. We'd be happy to work across the parties with doing that. I think one of the things to highlight about that is that money would come from SAS rather than from either universities or colleges' budgets, and that would be a good thing. We'd get more money into colleges, would protect, increase that articulation. We could actually increase the number of hours that students were receiving, the amount of credit, that students were receiving in colleges, so that they were able to articulate as well.
Thank you. Just before we move on to FE, I've got a couple of quick questions from George Adam and Neil Finlay.
Okay, I'm just going to ask the same question I asked previously. I'll maybe elaborate a wee bit more because I just got a shrug of the shoulders the last time. But for me, students are obviously the packages involved with them is the most important thing. Student life, how they enjoy it, how they get on. So can you give me your reaction to the new packages of student support and take it from there? Hopefully we can discuss it this time.
Well, it's something that we've campaigned for about 5 or 6 years now. So I think it's really good news that this package has been introduced, and I think as a package it presents the best HE student support system anywhere in the UK. I think it's important as well to say that this supports both HE students in colleges studying HNCs and HNDs as well as supporting university students. I think one of the things that we've noticed in the past, coming back to the retention rate in universities and also the HE retention rate in colleges hasn't been as good as it should be. And our previous research that we've done suggests that if we increase the amount of money in their pocket, that will help support students through to the end of their course, and that's got to be good for everyone, whether it's a student, whether it's government. So yeah, best package in the UK overall. It is a loan, and it would be even better if it was grant, if it was fully in grant.
That's still the best package in the UK. It's the best loan in the UK. Right. Thank you, Mr. Finlay. Anybody else want to respond to Mr. Adams' questions?
I would reiterate that it's great news for students. What I think you must remember as at least what one person in your previous panel said, that if you've got a programme budget for the FE or a programme budget for HE of a finite size, then by putting money into student support means that you are making choices and you're putting less money into other places. And that's, I think that in terms of the teaching budgets, colleges would look at envy at the fact that student support funding has been maintained. It's good. It's good for students. It's good for retention. It's good for keeping your students there.
From my perspective, as a constituency MSP, UWS have difficulties with retention rates. Yeah. And as already said by Robin Parker, it's a great thing.
It's good, and it also brings benefits to the institutions. Retention rates, which is one of the targets that the government is looking to improve, will be significantly improved by having a minimum income.
Lots of people want in here, so can I bring in Robin and Mary, and then a question from Marco?
Yeah, I just want to come back to something which is really around like if students are dropping out, then who's going to be left in our colleges and universities for colleges to be teaching. So I think it's really a crucial fundamental part of what we're doing. And just to come back to Neil's point as well, I mean, I think the ideal situation would be that it was a full grant, but the research we received and and this is coming back from students' views, and the biggest research report we did was that the most important thing to them was the amount of money they have in their pocket, rather than the amount of secondary importance was the amount of graduate debt they had. Both of them really important, obviously, and both of them are things that we should be striving to remove. But the most important thing was simply they had enough money in their pocket so they could get through their course, and they could pay their bills so they could simply be on their course.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Robin has said, yeah, I think it is very welcome. I think for the first time we also see support for part-time students. However, I guess, we'd always like it to be, I mean, the income threshold that you need to be under to access it is fairly low. However, it is recognised that there's that support for part-time students, which again picks up some issues around, people trying to improve and continuing professional development. And to pick up the issue around the fact that it's loans rather than grants, and again, I agree with Robin. However, it's not at the same rates as commercial loans or credit cards, which I think is obviously welcome, and obviously has less financial impact on the budgets too.
Neil Finlay?
No, I don't deny any of that, and I welcome the fact that there's more available, but it's the terminology around it. We should not call it a minimum income guarantee. We should call it a loan, because that is what it is. And I think it's misleading, that terminology, and that's my issue with it.
I don't think that's a question, I think that's a statement, so we'll leave it as it. Claire Adamson.
Yeah, it was just in the area of student support and the number of applications and the drop down south. I would just like to ask, but probably specifically Robin, just how important is free education? As it's, there's been a bit of discussion about it today, is that there's no tuition fees in Scotland, and obviously the SNP stands alone as the only party supporting this now in Scotland. So can you say just how important that is for students?
I mean, I think we've seen changes in applications, as you said, south of the border, and particularly where those applications are coming from. I think what we really need to address is that we've laid the foundations to me for making access much fairer in Scotland, through keeping tuition fees off the table, and through the student support package. We have to turn that into reality. It's a bit of it would be a much better situation. What we need to make sure is that the fact that we've put all this public funding into universities, so that we don't need tuition fees, we need to make sure that is actually something which benefits the full range of the public, and that's where the next change needs to come. So I think that needs to be the focus of where we go next.
Can I say that it's very welcome that there's no tuition fees, and we strongly believe that there should be free education, and it's a fundamental right, and it should be free at the point of access. And that goes for universities, colleges, and other forms of learning throughout your life, which are sadly being cut back on at the moment because of funding issues. But it is very welcome.
Okay, thank you. We've taken rather longer on HE than I had hoped, but we'll move on to FE now, and I'll begin with Neil Finlay.
I'll avoid responding to the party political point that was raised earlier. However, could I...
Can I just say, can everybody avoid responding to party political points? Let's try and stick to the FE stuff.
The previous panel had two professors and a chair of a college, and they were unable to give us a figure in terms of the budget cut for colleges. I wonder if the panel would like to have a stab at it.
So I think that the straight answer is it's 34.6 million, which is the cut that's being planned. John Swinney's recently announced budget. That's the planned cut for next year compared to the current year we've entered. So if we're going from the first budget of this Parliament since the election to this draft one, 34.6 million. One caveat I'd add that I think is important to the whole discussion is that level there, that's only that's only just begun to be spent in colleges. That's only just begun to be spent on students actually studying in academic year terms in the last few weeks. And I think the other thing that I should say about the previous budget is that there's a number of things in there that are around structural funds for college transformation. There's money that's come via SDS, so there's new things in there that we need to work out how those things are going to work out. And so I've got a lot of worries about how this year is going to pan out in terms of college funding on an academic year terms. And so I think the idea that we're contemplating a 34.6 million cut in the draft budget that's just been released, I think that's incredibly worrying, and something that I think in the way that happened last year, students really want to see politicians from across the Parliament work to improve that budget by the final stage. So I think it's something that the Education Committee really need to address over the next few months.
I suppose then, do any of the panel disagree with that figure?
No, I think from the EIS perspective too, around 34 million is our figure too, and it comes from the previous budget for 2012-2013 of around £546 million for FE, and the fact that the draft budget for 2013-14 has a figure around 511 million, and the difference being 34 million being the cut.
Sorry, Marco Baj.
Can I just ask, is that a revenue figure, a revenue and capital figure, or some other combination thereof?
It's overall college budget funding. So it's the in our briefing. It's the top line of that. There, I'm not sure what it is.
I think it's non-capital.
It's just no capital.
It's non-capital.
It's the FE programme budget.
So it's the revenue budget.
Yeah, no capital.
So I suppose we're maybe even just asking that question illustrates the difficulty that was being said by the last panel.
Can I, before I bring, can I just clarify? Are we looking at the original published figure from last year with the published figure for this year? Are we taking into account any of the in-year changes in the figures you've just given, or what? Just for my own.
That's comparing final budget with final budget. So that's taking into account all the changes that happened between the draft budget and the final budget through the process of the last budget thing. So that if you look over. It's on the second page of our briefing. We've included the College Transformation Fund that was announced between the draft budget and the final budget. We've included SDS delivered places and also the extra student support money.
Baseline announcement from last year with the baseline announcement from this year. It's the baseline announcement from last year plus the other stuff that was announced in year.
What it includes is the budget.
I was asking Mr. Parker.
It's the final budget compared to the draft budget.
Draft budget. Yeah. That's what I was trying to clarify. Okay, thank you.
Because we haven't got a final budget.
Can I just say that I sat drinking a cup of tea with Robin and David before this thing. We were discussing this earlier, and I agree with their figures too. However, it is so difficult to interpret, it's ridiculous. I am a product of the Scottish higher education system, and one of the things I did study was statistics, and still it is so difficult to come to a final conclusion because there is so much smoke and mirrors, and there needs to be much greater clarification over the whole process.
Lady Scanlon.
It's just convenient that all the members of the panel have said the cut for this year is 34 million, but on the EIS's paper, page 6, the footnote states that 8 million funding was brought forward from 13-14. This will have to be paid, and it's therefore questionable whether the 8 million should be considered as funding for this year. Blah, blah, blah. So are we really talking about 42 million rather than 34 million?
If I can try and
I need
answer.
more than a cup of tea to understand
yeah,
this.
Well,
I can tell you.
Most of us do. Can I say, first of all, the 34 million, as Robin stated, comes from the final budget passed last year, which is which also was a figure used in a Scottish Government news release earlier in September, 546. And then 511 comes from the draft budget this year. Now, those are budgets. That's what the Scottish Parliament effectively gives to SDS, SF, Scottish Funding Council, Scholars Development Scotland. We then get into spending and how the SFC, Scottish Funding Council, spend it. And in terms of 2012-13, the Scottish Funding Council brought £8 million forward from 13-14. Now, it doesn't tell us, and quite rightly so, the Scottish Government doesn't tell us in its draft budget whether that £8 million is going to be written off or whether it's going to be repaid in 1 year or in 2 years. We don't know. So what I'm doing there is raising the possibility that the £34 million cut in revenue may have the effect on Scottish Funding Council spending may be greater. Or the Scottish Funding Council might write it off, but we don't know. So I'm raising potentials.
Well, if I can just say, I think you're doing a wee bit more than raising potential, and I quote from your footnote, there is a strong argument, therefore, to state that 379 is the best figure to use.
I say potential cuts rather than, I mean, I'm quite clear that £8 million was brought forward. That's not a potential.
Between smoke and mirrors and potential, it's, you know, it's difficult. But, I mean, I'm just a substitute for today alone, but I find this totally bamboozling.
I don't know if you've got our evidence that we submitted in front of you, and if you turn to the third page of that, and we've called it Table 4, this is how we put together the different ways of measuring teaching funding. So this is in academic year terms. There's been a translation from financial year to academic terms. And this is money that's directly on teaching, it's directly on delivery activity kind of spending. And so to get from the 379 to the 409, you need to include ESF money, SDS money, as well as the funds brought forward. And actually, I think there's a really important point in this for the whole committee, because when you seek evidence from the Cabinet Secretary, I think some of the important questions to ask him are around what's going to happen with ESF funding. I think originally that was only about as far as now, but then there's been more money announced to Angela Constant's youth employment funding. Now, is some of that funding going to go back towards colleges again? I think the question of whether this SDS money, what's going to happen with that SDS money that went in last year, is that going to be repeated? Because if it doesn't get repeated... stick to the teaching budget, because I thought, you know, the rest is elsewhere. But if I focused on the teaching budget, particularly for further education, that's where my concerns about inequalities, articulation, and it is more than a 25% cut now from 10-11 to 12-13 if you take this 8 million in. But I think it's back to the biscuit tin.
The 8 million could be an additional cut to next year's college budgets. But at the moment, the Scottish Funding Council hasn't made an announcement on it. But they're sitting on a situation where they brought money forward from next year to this year, so something needs to be done about it.
Joan?
Yeah, just to clarify that, so the 511 figure doesn't actually include the College Transformation Fund.
It's a one-year budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's another 15 million.
No.
So the 15 million is in the 12-13. If you've got our evidence in front of you on that table 1 there, the 15 million makes up part of the 546, which is the final 12-13 budget. So that's the first budget of this Parliament that has just begun being spent on students in the last few weeks. In order for us to,
well, the Cabinet Secretary is coming in front of us in a couple of weeks, so I'm sure we'll clarify some of these questions then. Can I move on now? Marco Biaggi.
Yes. The last panel was quite confident that student numbers in further education were being maintained, but talked about the risks of displacement within that. Do you agree that student numbers will be maintained in further education?
It's not. No, we believe that the evidence coming back from colleges is that student numbers are being cut. Full-time student numbers are being cut, and certainly part-time student numbers are being cut. Courses are being cut, and even while they're saying they're still running the course, if they ran 3 courses, they're running 1 course instead. There are less access as well for part-time people, and also some of the people, sometimes the funding that made courses viable were for people who were unemployed and did less than 16 hours a week, or, for example, were asylum seekers, and these people are not getting the funding to go in the courses, and therefore the courses aren't running and are no longer viable. But certainly our experience is there are less students. I know the Herald said there was 10,000 waiting list, and as I said, it's our experience as well. We've got anecdotal evidence that the students are dropping out as soon as they're in the course as well, so they're not part of the numbers. So at Reid Kerr, we've got anecdotal evidence that 70% of students dropped out of one course within the first 2 weeks, but they're not counted as dropout rates as well. So, yeah.
So I think one of the first things to say, and it probably goes back to the budget situation rather than the places situation, but we'll come to that, is that the biggest cut that's happened to colleges in the last few years was a result of the last budget of the last Parliament, but that was the last academic year. So we've just finished seeing the consequences of that with the academic year that ended in the summer. So that's a really important point to keep in mind. In terms of places, I've got another important point to make, I think, which is, so if you, during the course of that last budget of the last Parliament, extra places were added between the draft budget and the final budget. However, when the places level was agreed for the last budget, so the first budget of this Parliament, it was done on the draft figures. So, in effect, places are being protected between the draft budget of the last Parliament and the final budget. No, sorry, the final budget of the last Parliament of the last budget of the last Parliament with the draft budget of the last budget of the last Parliament with the final budget of the first budget of the first Parliament. Now that means that in actuality, the number of that's not comparing like with like. So if you compare the final budget of the last
I don't know anybody else, but I have absolutely no idea what you're describing, Mr. Parker.
In actually, I guess what I'm saying, if you compare like with like, the short way of doing this, if you compare like with like, the final budget from 11-12 with the final budget of 12-13, there's actually a 1.5% reduction in places. But so there's a question around that. Actually, I think one of the things that's come out from the Herald stories recently has been about, actually, it would be no surprise if there's been an increase in demand for college places given the youth unemployment situation. So really the conversation should be around, in terms of achieving opportunities for all, how can we create extra opportunities, new opportunities, and with the appropriate funding going to colleges to do that.
You were comparing like with like final budgets. What would happen if you compared like with like using a different baseline, initial budgets?
So if you compare what was in draft budget with what was in the final budget, so you take out, I'll put it this way, the Scottish Government called those temporary extra places. Whether they're temporary or not, I think that's the question. If they are indeed temporary, and we question that, then they've been maintained at the same level.
So, okay, well, that is quite a good statement. The other point was about waiting lists. In all the discussion of the figure of waiting lists, there's been some reply that there will be people on waiting lists for more than one, but I've not seen figures for what the normal level of waiting list is. Are those figures available, and some kind of impression at least?
I mean, unfortunately, we don't know the final figures in terms of applications, and that won't come till later in the year, and we don't know how this compares to previous years. But I think to look at this from the outside, certainly some principals have said that they think this is increased, and to me that would logically make sense. If with the youth unemployment level, it would be no surprise whether both older people and younger people find it difficult to get into work and therefore applying to college.
I think we'd all accept that there'll be a lot of people looking to get into college at the moment, but it's hard to set the 10,000 into context of what previous years have been, since it was a freedom of information exercise. Am I right in that? So since we don't have that for previous years, we don't know if it's a 2% increase or whatever. The other direction I wanted to go in was opportunities for all and the potential for its delivery. The last panel, again, was quite positive about the achievability of opportunities for all within the college sector, but not necessarily with the obstacles that are being faced from the labour market. What would your views on that be?
Perhaps back to the student numbers. We believe, the EIS believes, that there's been a drop in student places in recent years, and that's drawn from Scottish Funding Council data. There is a question mark of what you define as a student place, you know, full-time equivalent, headcount, enrolments and the like, but we believe there's a drop. There certainly is a drop in the teaching activity, which is the weighted sums for example, 2011-12 is higher than for 2012-13. So, you know, there are fewer students in Scotland's colleges, and that's what the EIS view is. In terms of the opportunities for all, it's a programme designed to give a short opportunity for all 16 to 19-year-olds not in employment training or enrolled. It's just started this academic year, and it is too early to say how it's rolled out.
I mean, unless it's something particularly pertinent, I'm going to move on. But
first of all, I think Jim Gallagher on the previous panel very clear the difference between headcount and activity, and I think that is really important to note that there's been a shift there and within that situation. I think in terms of meeting opportunities for all, it's about creating real opportunities, and that needs to be jobs, that needs to be education, and both in universities and colleges, and creating as many opportunities as possible.
We're rapidly running out of time, but Neil Bibby and Lee MacArthur.
We've obviously just discussed the number of student places. I just wanted to ask, what do you foresee as the consequences of cutting college budgets in terms of employment of staff at colleges, and also in terms of course availability and choice for students?
If I can start with in terms of cutting colleges' teaching grants, that is going to have the effect of cutting the number of courses, and we've got evidence from the EIS Field branch secretaries that colleges are cutting courses. They are also merging college courses, so that if you've got two streams delivering one programme, they'll merge those two streams. They're also putting in larger classes. The Scottish Funding Council's advice for funding last year was that you could cut 2 hours from the delivery of a non-advanced course. In terms of staff, it's quite clear that the Scottish Government's own statistics published at the start of September have identified 1,300 fewer FE staff in the FE sector over the last 12 months, which, according to that document, is an 8% decrease. If you're looking at the future, and if you're, it's probable that the mergers will also lead to, unfortunately, some rationalisation in which the HNC, HND type courses may be reduced.
Yes.
There is a reduction in the number of staff, and it's mainly been through voluntary severance or people leaving and not being replaced. There is some compulsory redundancies, mainly in the private sector companies who work in colleges because they are not part of the colleges. There's staff who work in colleges, but because it's delivered by the private sector, they're the people who are getting made compulsory redundant. We have, in terms of support staff, we have things like technicians in Annie's Land. A number of them have been reduced, and there's serious concerns about health and safety in electrician courses, motor vehicle courses, and engineering workshops. We have much less admin staff, and consequently lecturers and managers are doing their own admin, which in some ways sounds nice, but quite frankly, the admin staff are probably better at doing the admin than the lecturers and the management, and actually also cheaper at doing it than the lecturers and the managers. We have real concern about the morale of the people who are left. a lot of them, there's less people left and they're going on to work streams to work towards mergers and stuff, so they're not even doing their own job, they're doing various different things to do with the fact that there's so much change happening in colleges. I've got quotes, "It's the worst I've felt in 11 years. Services are stretched to breaking point and morale is at an all-time low. We don't know where the axe is going to fall next." That's the kind of impact that it's having on staff in colleges.
I think, just very briefly, I'd be really worried about the impact of these cuts in terms of the quality of the college experience that students get. I think one of the really important ways to keep an eye on this will be around retention figures. And actually, retention is already a massive problem in colleges and something we should be working to improve. So if, as a result of college cuts, that means either contact hours are reduced or class sizes get bigger, or really crucial services like guidance, like careers, like counselling, those kind of things go, that's going to be, all those things contribute to actually a decline in the rate of retention. So actually, we need to be monitoring retention, we need to be protecting all those kinds of things.
It's very concerning to hear the impact the cuts have had so far. I just wanted to quickly ask you, the Chief Executive of Scotland's Colleges, John Henderson, I believe said last week that an educated and skilled workforce is essential to economic recovery. Do you believe that college cuts put at risk economic recovery?
Yes.
If we go ahead with a £34 million cut to colleges, that's going to, I can't see how that doesn't impact on the quality of education. I think it would be deeply concerning if it meant that the number of opportunities provided in colleges didn't continue. If student support isn't protected, although it looks like it will, if all of those things go down, that's bad for, particularly for unemployment, but more generally for the economy, I think.
Yes, is my answer.
Yeah, no, I agree too.
Okay, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. As Marco said, the previous panel obviously expressed their confidence that the opportunities for all guarantee could be met, although with some caveats to that in terms of potential impact on the other roles that colleges perform, particularly for older students and those seeking reskilling. I certainly appreciate your observations on that and how that tension could be managed or balanced, be addressed. And similarly, Mr Swinney again reiterated last week the government's commitment to a policy of no compulsory redundancies. I think, Ms Phillips, you've already referred to what's happening in the private sector component of the FE environment, but I was wondering whether the panel felt that that policy of no compulsory redundancies could be achieved against the backdrop of the sort of cut that we're seeing, and indeed, I suppose, the regionalisation agenda.
We have, I have great concerns about the opportunity of access, because sometimes the people going into FE need more support because they've not done so well in school, or they have difficult home circumstances, they've got children, and they often need more support. That support is being cut back. Last year in Langside College, it took till December before some people could receive their bursaries because it was so understaffed. I understand they've rectified the situation this year, but I know a number of colleges are predicting it's going to be November, certainly, before bursaries are paid. So even if you've got the opportunity, getting people to stay on the course is very difficult because they need money. They need the support. Providing careers advice from My World of Work, well, it's a very nice website, but often people need one-to-one tuition. They're a careers advisor because individual people speaking to people provides them with excellent support and provides them with much greater guidance than a website could do. Again, the larger the class size for lecturers, I think that again limits the one-to-one support and help that sometimes is needed in terms of teaching, in terms of counselling, in terms of travel, in terms of all these things. I think it is problematic. In terms of the regionalisation plans, I think there's some problems. Already we see that colleges that have more than one campus, a lot of the support services are centralised, and you have to travel to get various things, and that's not always possible for people to do. And when you've got places like Aberdeen College and Banff and Buchan potentially merging. If Banff and Buchan people have to travel down the distance between them to get to the main resources, which are likely to be based in Aberdeen College because it's a bigger centre, the travelling will be much greater. They might not get counselling support, they might not get the same financial support, might not get help with their travel, indeed, in the time it takes to do that. So we have great concerns about access and the ability to access.
If I can perhaps look at the two questions you put. The first one regarding the tensions between the older students, possibly needing reskilling or the like, with the younger students. It's quite clear that the government policy is to focus the work of FE colleges to the younger students, to the 16 to 19, and by focusing their delivery on full-time courses for these students and courses that are aimed to deliver better prospects of success with employment. Now, if you look at for what we've seen of the outcome agreements in colleges are tailoring their courses to meet the government's priorities. And consequently, the older students will be losing out. I think and that's the teaching activity, that the weighted sums that are carried out are now being reconfigured, refocused towards your 16 to 19-year-olds. In terms of your opportunities for all, that's a separate issue to do with the whole teaching of the universities of colleges, and it brings its own finances, its own funding. And so I wouldn't conflate the two with general teaching activity. In terms of compulsory redundancies, there is no compulsory agreement within the FE sector. Depending on who you listen to, the FE sector is or is not part of the public sector, and consequently it isn't covered by the guarantee given by the Scottish Government. In the last year, 1,300 people have left the sector, mainly through voluntary severances. However, there has been, and I think, to be honest, it must be acknowledged the good work and the influence that the government has put on the sector not to make compulsory redundancies, and it would be churlish not to accept that or to acknowledge that. However, there have been compulsory redundancies within the sector, including for lecturers, and at the end of the day, the reason for the voluntary severances and the compulsory redundancies is driven by FE spending cuts.
Can I reiterate? I should have mentioned this. I think it's perfectly feasible to have no compulsory redundancies, and I know there has been some pressure applied by the government, and that's welcome. But there could be more done, and there have been compulsory redundancies and continue to be compulsory redundancies. I would also say the best way to stop these compulsory redundancies taking place is to fund FE properly, and I do not believe it is being funded sufficiently.
Can I ask where you would take the money from in the budget? Because one of the things that committees have to do is, if they recommend that there's an increased expenditure in one area, they must say where that money would come from. So where would you recommend that we say that it comes from?
Well, there's a poison chalice.
Well, we have to answer that question.
It's not for me to say where it should come from, I don't believe. What I would say is we believe that education should be well funded and free at the point of access, and it should come from taxation.
Yes, but the education budget has gone up by 11% in cash terms this year, of course.
Mm-hmm. But that's not going to FE.
So you're saying it should come from somewhere else within the education sector? You're not. Okay. Robin looks as if he's going to give me an answer there.
I'll take you on this. I mean, firstly, I'd say, there's political choices to be made across the whole Parliament, and I think education is absolutely going to be at the heart of tackling youth unemployment. It's absolutely going to be at the heart of economic growth, economic recovery in Scotland, and colleges are going to have a crucial role within all of that. So, colleges need to be properly funded. We do want to come into this with positive suggestions, and I will go back to one that I highlighted earlier in response to a question around bringing up the level of college funding for higher education delivery to the same level it is for universities, and that could be something that's done from the SAS budget. So there's just one suggestion. There are ideas out there. And I think colleges have a big role to play around the youth unemployment agenda. So using money that's been set aside already by government, whether that's I mentioned earlier European structural funds, but there's other money out there. Those money should, I think, be delivered through colleges because they are an excellent way of delivering those kind of programs.
Can I also add that again we believe that there could be specific Scottish levies on either corporation tax or on employers' national insurance because, quite frankly, employers benefit massively from having an educated workforce, and that could be looked at too.
Well, that's an interesting idea. Can I thank all of the witnesses for coming along this morning and giving their evidence. It's been very enlightening and very helpful, and I'm sure it will help us in asking further questions of the panelists next week and eventually the two Cabinet Secretaries. Thank you very much. I suspend briefly. Welcome back, and our fourth item is to take evidence on the Population Statistics Act 1938 Modification Scotland Order 2012 draft. This is an opportunity for members to ask any technical questions or to seek clarification on the instrument. The committee will then be invited to consider the motion to approve the instrument under agenda item 5. As this is the first time that the Minister has come to the committee, can I welcome Hamza Yusuf in his new role as Minister for External Affairs and International Development, and congratulate him on his appointment. Can I also welcome Judith Brown, Solicitor, Scottish Government Legal Directorate, and Kirsty McLachlan, Head of Demography at National Records of Scotland. Minister, can I invite you to make a brief opening statement?
Thank you very much, Convener, and I am grateful for the opportunity to say briefly why this order is needed and to answer any questions that the member may have. I should say from the offset, Convener, it's not only my first committee appearance in front of this committee, but my first committee appearance whatsoever, and it does seem somewhat different on this side of the table than where I previously have been. Under the existing legislation, Convener, when a birth or stillbirth is registered, certain details are provided. In the words of the Act, except where the birth is of an illegitimate child. That should be changed because of the Family Law Scotland Act of 2006, which abolished the status of illegitimacy. Wherever possible, the registration process should collect exactly the same kind of information, whether the births are within a marriage or out with marriage. The existing legislation also specifies that if the parent of the child are a married couple, the mother should be asked if she has been married before her current marriage. Again, the wording of the legislation needs to be brought up to date, in this case to take account of the possibility that the mother is or has been in a civil partnership. If the order were approved, the main change to the registration process would be that the mother's number of previous live births would be collected in all cases rather than only when the parents are married. That would make possible much better statistics about the fertility of the population of Scotland than can be currently produced, when that information is only collected at the present moment for about half of all births. More comprehensive data could then be used to inform research into fertility, enable more accurate projections of the population, and that can be used for planning processes in terms of schools and hospitals and so on. In the spring, the Registrar General consulted various interested parties, including local authorities who are responsible for registering births and stillbirths, NHS boards, some other relevant organisations, and some users of population statistics. There were no objections to the proposals. Indeed, 25 out of 28 respondents stated they supported it without expressing any reservations whatsoever. So there seems to be a general consensus that the order is needed. I hope the remarks have been helpful. Of course, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that members may have, and then therefore hope that the committee will recommend that it should be approved.
Thank you very much, Minister. Can I ask if members have any technical questions or points of clarification from the Minister or officials? Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Convener. You suggested that there was broad support for the measure, and I can certainly see why, but you also indicated that there were 2 or 3 who expressed reservations. Are you able to say what those reservations were? Were they of a technical nature?
From my understanding, it was really about how this would be handled in terms, and concerns perhaps also expressed. I think concerns have also been expressed previously about why data is only collected from mothers as opposed to fathers. But I think, and officials can step in here, but I think the reservations more centred around how this would be done in a tactful, because some of the information that we're dealing with can be quite sensitive.
Do officials have any comments they want to make on that?
No, I think what Mr Yousaf said is quite correct. There was various suggestions and comments. There was only 2 real comments that were concerned about the sensitivity of the data, and they asked whether we could just drop it all together rather than get the information for all births. And the reason why we don't want to do that is because then we lose the potential for collecting the information to inform fertility projections. And there was another question about why did we not ask it of men? Why was it just asked of the mothers? And again, the reason is because the fertility relates to women of childbearing age rather than men.
Thanks for that point of clarification, Mr MacArthur. Are there any further questions from members before I step in? It does say in the Minister, in the executive note at paragraph 15, that the impact of this order will have very little effect on NRS. However, there is a considerable amount of additional information that is being collected. It goes on to say that it will have a very little effect on NRS, as it can very easily change its computer system and forms. Now, not to be pessimistic about it, but I've kind of heard this several times before, and I see laughter around this table about it very easily changing computer systems. Could you perhaps provide some clarity about what steps NRS has taken to upgrade its computer systems and provide us with some guarantees that, in fact, it will be done very easily?
Convener, before being in the position that I was in, I sat in the Public Audit Committee, where we took great delight at often seeing systems being promised to be changed, and those members that were on the Public Audit Committee for a number of years would come back to that very point. I will ask officials to respond back to the committee to give clarification. I think actually a lot of the questions surrounding the changes was asked whether or not this could be this information could be collected from the NHS. And so various data sets were taken, but it was shown that that information, the information that could be collected from the NHS would not give us the information that we needed. And in order to get that information to change the NHS systems would just provide with us with a great difficulty. So we recognise that there can be difficulties, but we hope that the route that we've chosen to take will be a lot easier. And less disruptive in terms of systems, information systems. But I will ask officials to give you a little bit more of a written clarification on that point.
Well, I'd be interested to hear what officials have to say in writing. The problem being that we're about to, in about 1 minute's time, actually take a vote on this particular order. So I don't know whether officials can provide any evidence now about the steps that NRS has taken on the computer systems.
The fields are already there in the system. So at present, the mother's asked whether she's married before her marriage to the child's father, and she'd answer yes or no. If she answers no, she won't be asked about the number of previous children within marriage. The only change is now that she will be asked it, and the fields are there in the computer system to record it. So it's just really a difference in process. The change will be in the registrars having different instructions as to what to do when somebody comes. So they won't be asking for previous births only within marriage. They'll be asking for previous births full stop.
In terms of, there are changes in terms of what's been asked, but also a very minor change in terms of the computer system itself. Okay, thank you very much. Any members have any further questions? No. Can I move now to item 5 on the agenda? Now that we've received the briefing, the next item on our agenda is formal consideration of the motion to approve the order. Can I invite the Minister to speak to and move motion S4M 04089?
Well, no need to say anything further than what's already been said, but I formally move the order.
Thank you. Invite any comments from members on this order? Okay. I presume you don't have anything you wish to respond to then, Minister. Therefore, given there are no further comments, can I ask that motion S4M 04089 be agreed to? Are we all agreed? Thank you very much. Can I suspend briefly to allow witnesses to leave the table? Thank you, Minister. The next item on this morning's agenda is consideration of 2 negative statutory instruments. No motion to annul has been lodged in respect of either instrument, and the Subordinate Legislation Committee determined that it did not need to draw the attention of Parliament to either. Can I ask members if they have any comments? Mr Finlay.
On the Elmwood, Oakridge and Barony College transfer, it's just there are significant concerns about this merger. I've had quite a number of representations and indeed met with the Cabinet Secretary with a deputation from Oakridge College, Barony and Elmwood. And the concerns are that this is a forced merger, forced takeover rather than a merger. I understand that the board at Oakridge College voted by just one to approve the process, and there's a feeling that the concerns of staff and students have been ignored, and that in general the the takeover by the Scottish Agricultural College is based on the commercial nature of the SAC rather than for academic work that it does. Morale amongst staff is extremely low, and the greatest fear amongst all the participating colleges is in relation to local access. So just to put on the record those concerns.
Thank you. Liam MacArthur.
Convener, I maybe haven't received the volume of correspondence that Neil has, but clearly was copied into concerns that were circulated around committee members earlier in the week. I mean, there do seem to be questions about some of the kind of financial assumptions that have been made, which it would be useful to get either or both SAC and or the Scottish Government's response to before we look to sign off on this. So if there's scope to do that, I would certainly be keen that we pursue that option.
Both the questions are on the first order, 237 on Oakridge, Barony, etc. Are there any questions or points members want to make on the Julianesque College and Stevenson College, Edinburgh, transfer and closure order? Okay, I'll take these separately because I think that there's clearly one where we don't have any questions and one where there are some questions. Just to answer Lee MacArthur's question, first of all, there is time. We do not have to take and make a recommendation today on these, but it might be helpful to split them and do them separately. I think Mr Finlay's concerns and raised on behalf of his constituents and Mr MacArthur's comments I would agree with, and I think that I'll take note of and agree with some of them that perhaps what we need to do is seek a government response to some of the questions that have been raised by Mr Finlay's constituents, the points that Mr MacArthur's raised, and certainly the email that has been sent to members of the committee by one of the individuals concerned. So I think there are a number of questions that need to be clarified. So I think with the committee's consent, I would seek answers to these questions from the government before we take SSI 2012-237. Mary Scanlon.
Yes, I'm somewhat surprised in the policy note for the merger of these colleges that the consultation was done with the education authorities in each area of the college and also with the Scottish Further and Higher Education Funding. And I would have thought, given that this covers the agricultural sector for a huge part of the land map of Scotland, I wondered, was it wise to limit the consultation, or should it have been extended, throughout the agricultural areas where you would expect the students to come from?
Well, I think we can add that question to the questions that we raise in correspondence with the government. I think obviously again on 237, are members content to that I write to the government on Order SSI 2012-237 and then we take that at a future meeting? Agreed. Can I then ask if any members have any comments, just to clarify finally on SSI 2012-238? No comments. Therefore, does the committee agree to make no recommendation to the Parliament on SSI 2012-238? Thank you very much. We will therefore take 237 at a future meeting once we've received a response from the Scottish Government. As the committee has agreed to hold the next item in private, I now close the meeting to the public.